Since Saudi Arabia and Iran made a historic deal to talk to each other in March 2023, which was facilitated by China, the Middle East's politics have changed a lot. The rivalry between these two powerful countries, which has historically been a defining feature of regional politics, is beginning to change. This change is happening as Saudi Arabia tries to find a balance between its long-term relationship with the US and its growing ties with Iran. The Beijing Agreement, which was reached after China's successful diplomacy in 2023, was a major step towards easing relations between Saudi Arabia and Iran. Beijing, a major purchaser of oil from both nations, has actively encouraged deeper economic and political cooperation between the two countries. This mediation has provided Tehran with much-needed economic prospects and opened avenues for Riyadh to address its strategic goals, including economic diversification under Vision 2031. Important change since the criticism is Saudi Arabia's plan to increase trade with Iran even though there are already sanctions in place. Trade deals are mostly about non-controversial things like food and medicine, and private Saudi companies as well as third-party countries like Iraq may be involved. Iran wants to boost trade to $1 billion a year, which shows how important this issue is to the economy. With its new move, Saudi Arabia is in the news. Saudi Arabia has chosen to give up on its goal of a complete defense pact with the US, which depended on getting along with Israel again. This change is mostly because of the ongoing Israeli military operations in Gaza and the anger that they have caused across the Middle East. In this video, we explain what the treaty said and why Saudi Arabia chose to back the people of the Middle East instead of the US and its allies. First, let's talk about the relationship between the US and Saudi Arabia. The US-Saudi Arabia relationship has changed a lot since it began in the early 1900s. It now includes economic, political, and military aspects. POS2's early relations and oil discovery in 1931, the US officially recognized Saudi Arabia as a newly united kingdom led by King Abdulaziz Al Saud. The award came at a time when the world was starting to take notice of Saudi Arabia's huge natural resource potential. 2 years later, the US company Standard Oil of California, SoCal, was given permission to look for oil in the kingdom. This led to the groundbreaking discovery of oil in the Dammam field in 1938, which made Saudi Arabia an emerging oil powerhouse. The oil discoveries helped create Aramco, the Arabian American Oil Company, a group of US companies that would dominate Saudi Arabia's oil production for decades. By the late 1930s, Saudi Arabia's oil reserves were known to be among the largest, and how Saudi Arabia and oil quickly became the most important part of the relationship between the two countries because it gave the US important energy sources and gave Saudi Arabia the technology and know-how to use its newfound wealth. The deal at Quincy during World War II. During World War III, Saudi Arabia became much more important from a military point of view. In 1945, President Franklin D. Roosevelt met with King Abdulaziz on the USS Quincy in the Suez Canal. This historic meeting led to the Quincy Agreement, an informal but important agreement that would guide our future. In return for sure access to Saudi Arabia's oil resources, the US promised to protect Saudi Arabia's authority for many years. During the war, Saudi Arabia's limited oil production became essential to Allied activities. After World War II, oil production grew by leaps and bounds, and Saudi Arabia became an important energy provider to markets around the world. Not only did the Quincy Agreement start a security for oil arrangement, but it also set the stage for a long-term strategic relationship. During the Cold War and regional changes during the Cold War, Saudi Arabia played a key role in the United States. ally in the Middle East, especially as Soviet influence grew in the area. However, the relationship took a big hit during the 1973 oil embargo. Because the US supported Israel in the Yom Kippur War, Saudi Arabia and other OPEC countries cut off oil exports to the US, which caused a global energy crisis. Oil prices went from $3 to $12 per barrel, and the embargo had a big effect on Western economies. Despite these problems, the US and Saudi Arabia were able to mend their relationship. The embargo made clear Saudi Arabia's political power as an oil provider and pushed the U.S. to create its own energy policies, such as creating the Strategic Petroleum Reserve in 1975. During the rest of the Cold War, Saudi Arabia remained a loyal ally, helping us fight communism and keep the area stable. The U.S. history changed when Iraq invaded Kuwait in 1990. Having to deal with the threat of Iraqi attack, Saudi Arabia asked the U.S. for armed help to protect its borders. Over 500,000 U.S. troops were sent to Saudi Arabia as part of Operation Desert Storm, which was one of the biggest military mobilizations in U.S. history. This action successfully drove Iraqi forces out of Kuwait and protected Saudi territory. Saudi Arabia donated about $60 billion to help pay for the war, which was a big part of their involvement in the fight. The Gulf War strengthened the military alliance between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia. During the 1990s, the U.S. kept a large military presence in Saudi Arabia, and key facilities like Prince Sultan Air Base were essential to U.S. operations in the region, strengthening the defense of the partnership. The attack on September 11, 2001, put a lot of stress on us. Saudi American ties. When it came out that 15 of the 19 terrorists were Saudi citizens, Saudi Arabia's part in encouraging radical ideas was looked at more closely. U.S. critics of the IES said that the kingdom was letting Wahhabi teachings encourage radicalism, which made the relationship between the two countries even more complicated. In response, Saudi Arabia stepped up its fight against terrorism, working closely with U.S. intelligence agencies to break up terrorist networks like Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. From 2003 to 2017, Saudi authorities carried out more than 1,000 counter-terrorism operations, arresting militants and stopping plots. The country also spent more than $100 billion on improvements at home, such as changes to its education system to stop terrorism. These steps helped the two countries trust each other again and work together to fight global terrorism. We face new difficulties and have new chances in the 21st century. How Saudi Arabia and the two nations collaborated extensively to combat the rise of ISIS in the 2010s, with Saudi Arabia hosting coalition forces and providing logistic ICAL support. However, the conflict in Yemen emerged as a controversial issue. The U.S. provided arms and intelligence to the Saudi-led coalition fighting Houthi rebels, but the high civilian toll of the conflict led to growing criticism in the U.S. Congress. The 2018 murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi further strained relations, prompting bipartisan calls in the U.S. for a reassessment of arms sales and strategic ties. Despite these challenges, the relationship persists, driven by mutual interests in energy security and regional stability. Arms sales continued, with Saudi Arabia purchasing approximately $64 billion worth of US weapons between 2015 and 2021. Let's take a quick pause. If you've enjoyed the video so far, could we ask a small favor? Please hit the like button to help us reach more people, and sharing your ideas or feedback in the comments makes an even bigger difference. Thanks for watching. Now, let's go back to the US-Saudi relationship during the Biden administration. Is oil production for decades. By the late 1930s, Saudi Arabia's oil reserves were known to be among the largest in the How Saudi Arabia and oil quickly became the most important. However, strategic interests such as energy security and regional stability have required continued engagement. In 2023, the U.S. lifted restrictions on some arms sales to Saudi Arabia, indicating a possible warming of relations. Now, let's talk about the role of the U.S. in normalizing relations between Saudi Arabia and Israel. The U.S. has been working hard to improve relations between Saudi Arabia and Israel in order to change the political landscape of the Middle East and make the region more stable. This plan has faced many problems and changes since its initial efforts and strategic goals were set. The U.S. has long tried to improve bilateral links between Israel and Arab nations, seeing this as essential for peace in the area and a way to protect both sides from risks, especially from Iran. The Abraham Accords of 2020, which made things better between Israel and the United Arab Emirates. The U.S. hoped that Saudi Arabia would follow the lead set by Bahrain and Morocco. In 2023, the Biden administration worked harder to make a deal between Saudi Arabia and Israel, offering U.S. security guarantees and help in building a civilian nuclear program for Saudi Arabia as incentives. Normalizing relations with Israel has always been linked to the creation of a Palestinian state, as outlined in the Arab Peace Initiative of 2002. However, in 2023, reports said that Saudi Arabia's leaders were thinking about normalizing relations with Israel without making quick progress on Palestinian statehood, instead focusing on strategic benefits and countering Iranian influence. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman said that normalizing relations with Israel was a real step forward, which could mean a change in policy. The war between Israel and Hamas in October 2023 made attempts to get things back to normal very hard. All the fighting brought the Palestinian problem back to the eyes of the world, which made Saudi Arabia's stance more difficult. Reports say that the kingdom stopped normalization talks with Israel because of the current conflict. The kingdom attacked Israel's armed activities. Historically, U.S. governments have seen normalizing relations between Saudi Arabia and Israel as a strategic goal. President Biden tried to make this happen as a matter of foreign policy, and former President Trump and his advisors also backed such efforts. The political climate in the U.S. affects how these projects are carried out and how quickly they need to be completed. Both parties agree that normalization could be beneficial. The military relationship between Saudi Arabia and Iran has also seen some firsts, like naval training in the northern Indian Ocean with troops from Saudi Arabia, Iran, Russia, and other countries in the region. At the same time, high-level talks between military leaders show a careful but real move towards working together. In politics, Saudi Arabia's strong language against Israel serves two purposes. It addresses feelings at home and in the region about the Gaza war, and it keeps a soft spot on Iran's allies like Hezbollah and Hamas, even though most Saudis don't agree with Iran's involvement in regional terrorism. Based on how their friendship is going now, Riyadh wants to reduce risks by talking to them directly. If Saudi Arabia and Iran do form a partnership in the future, it will probably be based on practical issues rather than shared beliefs. They could work together on economic issues, especially in areas like energy trade and building up infrastructure. This relationship will also depend on how well both countries handle regional battles and their use of proxies. This is because they both want to avoid instability that could get in the way of their own internal goals. The Vision 2030 plan of Saudi Arabia and Iran's economic revival efforts create a common interest in regional stability, which could lead to cooperation on international platforms like the BRICS group. However, the alliance's long-term success will depend on both countries' ability to deal with long-lasting mistrust and pressures from other countries, especially the US and other global powers. Strategically, the alliance will stay fluid as long as Saudi Arabia keeps strong ties with the US and works with Iran to counter regional threats. This two-pronged approach helps Riyadh deal with its immediate security concerns while also advancing its larger economic goals. Iran, on the other hand, stands to win morally and economically from less isolation, as long as it keeps its promises to comfort its neighbors. However, there are still big problems to solve, such as ideological differences and legacy conflicts. The changing relationship between Saudi Arabia and Iran is a careful but transformative change in Middle Eastern affairs. As both countries look for ways to work together, the possibility of a long-lasting and strategic partnership still looms large. Stop for 2 seconds. Congratulations on watching this video. We really appreciate you being here with us today. If our content spoke to you or inspired you, please show your support by liking and following to stay connected with our community.